Welcome to the Enlightenment Podcast, to our viewers and listeners joining us from around the world as we dive into meaningful dialogue about Palestine, offering an insight and context that is often very sorely missing from legacy media, and also taking some time to celebrate Palestine's traditions, culture, and rich heritage. Today, we are excited to be joined by Rania Batrice, a Palestinian-American political strategist who went from being Bernie Sanders' deputy campaign manager to mobilizing Hollywood's most powerful voices for Palestine. And today, she's going to talk to us about art, advocacy, political strategy, and the way that those are reshaping the global movement for Palestinian liberation. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that the ceasefire continues to be violated daily by the settler colony of Israel. Palestinians are continuing to be bombed, murdered, and just to die from the lack of aid and from cold in Gaza. These are not isolated incidents. This is a systematic ethnic cleansing going on through various means. And we just wanted to draw your attention to that because a lot of people we speak to think that the ceasefire means that there is no issue anymore. On that happy note, Rania, welcome to the Enlightenment Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolute pleasure.
And Shamim, let's start with you for a change. How did Rania come to our attention?
Well, I was directing an upcoming BBC show not long ago and met a very wonderful actress, one of my cast, Shalini Paris, who recommended that Rania and us get together because I guess we're all working in sort of the same worlds in many ways.
Yeah. So, ahlan, Rania, and welcome to the Enlightenment Podcast.
Shukran, ahlan feek.
So let's start, Rania. So personal history shapes our understanding of injustice. And you're the daughter of Palestinian immigrants who went to America and they pursued a better life for themselves. And you were raised in a traditional Catholic household, like my dad's side of the family from Bethlehem. So could you please tell us about your family, your Palestinian roots, the stories they brought and carried forward with them, and how did that shape your Palestinian heritage? And also, how did it shape how you saw the world and how you got into politics, basically?
This is such a wonderful question. And it's interesting because I think even before I registered my heritage. So from a very, very young age, before I think as a child, I could understand what it meant necessarily, to be Palestinian. I knew what I understood first was the otherizing. So I grew up in a West Texas town among a lot of very conservative people. And as you mentioned, I was raised Catholic, so I always joke it's a very special brand of conservatism between the Catholicism and West Texas. We did actually go back home for the first several years of my life. My mom's dad, my grandfather was very ill, so we were there mostly, but then we came back to this West Texas town. And like I said, I think even before I could understand really fully what it meant, the dynamics and the cruelty and all those things, I just understood we were different. My parents are darker complected than I am. They have accents. We spoke a different language. And I have two brothers who I love so much. And when we were young, kids can be so cruel, and the otherizing starts at a young age. Although I always say it comes from somewhere. The kids don't grow up knowing to hate or be hateful. But my brothers were very impacted by kind of that otherizing. I have always been a little bit rebellious, okay, maybe a lot rebellious. And so my brothers went the tact of, please don't speak to us in Arabic in public. I was yelling across the parking lot at my parents in Arabic because I'm like, this is who I am, this is who we are. Come at me, you know what I mean? And so, but I appreciate, and we see this a lot, I think, with immigrant families in general, but especially Palestinian immigrant families, where there is this desperation to assimilate, and it's comes from a place of fear. It took me a very long time to understand this from my parents, who I'm very close to, I love very, very much. But they wanted us to assimilate. They wanted us to be like everybody else. They wanted us to just kind of keep our heads down, not draw too much attention, not, just exist in the space that we were living in, because they worked so hard to get out of the situation they had been in. And so again, but I think before I even understood the depth of all of it, I knew something about us was different. Um, I was then, I'm still now, incredibly proud of my heritage. I am so proud to be Palestinian. And I know we'll get into it more a little bit later, but even within my this very long, insane career I've had people say to me, like, maybe don't say that you're Palestinian, and that honestly, that started when I was very young. And I the fastest way to make me do something is to tell me not to. So yeah, I think it really, I saw from a very young age what injustice and otherizing and just cruelty looked like. And I think if you see the through line of my life, and if you see all the things, and I know, again, we'll talk about it more in a little bit, just I have my hands in a lot of different places. It seems very disjointed, but when you come to the root of it, to just my childhood and the childhood of so many Palestinian children, it makes perfect sense. So yeah, I think that's kind of where it all started.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it makes total sense. Rania, you hang out with directors and actors and story makers. We're all obsessed with moments of transformation. Can you talk to us a little bit about when you were at college? I think you were at Austin College and you became politically active and developed what you refer to as intersectional collaboration, bringing different movements together in a way. I'd love to hear more about that. But also, was there kind of any specific moment or idea that sort of it was a light bulb moment for you and bringing your Palestinian identity into a collective vision of liberation in a broader sense? Did something like that click in a particular way?
I think it was always in me, even like I said, from a very young age. But going to college, there was a moment. It sort of changed my whole life and my entire trajectory, because I was going to be a doctor, and all the things. I think I'm the least educated person in my family, and I think Palestinians are highly, highly educated, except for me. Um, but that was sort of my life plan, as I was going to be a doctor. And I'm still, frankly, fascinated by science and medicine. Both my brothers are scientists. They're absolute geniuses. My brain just does not function that way. But the moment for me where it really is, I do call it my life-changing experience, is I was in El Salvador. Um, it feels like a million years ago. I actually haven't talked about this in a really long time, so thank you for allowing me this opportunity. But I was helping do art therapy with gang members who were frankly children, young men and young boys in El Salvador who, and if you know the history of El Salvador and what happened in the 80s, again, with the US complicity, we always have our hands in the worst things. Um, you can kind of see again the intersection between the struggle of the Salvadorans, the struggle of Palestinians, the struggle of indigenous people in general around the world, in the United States and in other parts of the world as well. And I remember being in that moment and thinking, actually, literally, what I thought is, I can't be in school for 8 more years. I want to get to work now. This is important right now. And the injustices that were all around us, and that's what's so sad about the moment that we're living in, is none of this is new. And you mentioned at the top, it's systemic and it's intentional. And for me, I believe it's the cornerstone of white supremacy. I think is to keep us divided and fighting each other, so we're not actually fighting the true oppressors. um, And so that spending that time in El Salvador really did change my life. And it did, I knew it somewhere innately inside of me. I knew it was there, but it concretized how all of our struggles are truly connected. And you can't say you care about one thing and not care about the other. And it just became so clear in those moments, sitting with the people. And I don't know if you've ever been to El Salvador, but it's the most, I mean, truly one of the poorest countries. A lot of the areas are very, very poverty stricken, and some of the most beautiful people you'll ever meet in your life. They'll literally give you the last vegetable off of their table. I mean, I saw it happen, and it reminded me of my family, frankly. It reminded me of our people, and it was like being at home. And yeah, I think that moment was incredibly impactful in a number of ways, and it really did sort of change the trajectory of everything I did. And it happened to my freshman year of college is when, when I was in El Salvador. So there you go.
Oh, wonderful. Well, as you said, I think a lot of people who don't know Palestinians and meet them are always they always comment about the generosity and the giving and the caring. As you said, the last bite it's always offered, or the first bite is always offered to people, and the generosity. So, and we are interconnected. And then, yeah, for us Palestinians, there's no difference between Christian, Muslim, or all Palestinians. But what's baffling in the American Christian evangelicals, and as you know, I went to Baylor for my undergrad in Waco, in Texas as well. Um, the Christian evangelicals are some of the biggest supporters and donors to the settler colony of Israel, and they it's the same Israelis who are also killing and ethnically cleansing the Christian Palestinians. So it's really ironic. So is there an effort? I mean, you're in the heart of it in Texas. Is there an effort ongoing to educate these evangelicals? Because there are huge, there are, I think, 60 or 70 million in America alone. And what needs to happen to change that narrative away from their unequivocal support to Israel?
Also, such a great question. And there are efforts within the faith community to unindoctrinate them, frankly, and also efforts to take them to see for themselves, to go to Bethlehem and see. I mean, the heart of Christianity, some of the oldest structures in the world exist on that land, on our land. And in part, I think it's willful ignorance. And in part, I think it's just being, frankly, uneducated. I can't tell you how many times personally, I think organized religion is the root of a lot of problems. And so I consider myself to be more spiritual than religious, but there is this very concerted, decades long effort to make this some kind of a religious conflict specifically between Muslim people and Jewish people. And it's absurd. That's not what this is. We know that's not what this is. But it's an intentional effort, frankly, from the Zionist campaign to make that what this is about. Because it's a lot, because if people really knew that population, especially as you're talking about that evangelical Christian community, if they had full awareness of the fact that the people that they claim to care about so much are being harassed, tortured, killed, impacted. Some of the most sacred sites to Christians in the world are being decimated and desecrated. We'd be having a different conversation, and they know that. I always say, the Zionist entity is evil, but they're not stupid. They know what they're doing, and it's very intentional, and it's across decades and decades of effort in making this happen. I remind people all the time, APAC, which is the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. It's a political arm in the United States that was founded in 1953. They have spent trillions of dollars to indoctrinate the American people, and not just the American people, but especially the American people, and especially Christians. And we see it happening today. They've spent hundreds of millions of dollars geo targeting evangelical Christian communities, because in the US and other countries again as well, we're seeing a flip in public opinion. So what are they doing? They're dumping more money into it so that they can spread more propaganda. It's literally happening right now. And the way that media works, with digital media these days, you can literally target by zip codes. So you can target those evangelical churches and communities that might have larger evangelical populations. And the thing that just makes my head want to explode about all of this is the support is around the second coming of Jesus, in which all of the Jewish people will be killed as part of this biblical teaching. And so the support is so twisted and violent and just sick, frankly. I'm sorry, but really, I'm not that sorry. It's really unhinged. And that is where the support is coming from. And that is where the vast majority, people in the United States or they're starting to understand. The vast majority of the funding to these entities like AIPAC that I was just talking about come from evangelical Christians. It doesn't even come from the Jewish community. It comes from evangelical Christians. And so it is an indoctrination, and we do have a lot of work ahead of us, and there are people doing very important work to sort of get into those communities and say, look, talk to these Christian Palestinians. I can't tell you how many times their eyes get so big when I tell them I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school for 10 years. When I was back home, I went to Catholic school, and their eyes are just like, oh my gosh, you're a Catholic Palestinian? I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of us. You know what I mean? So it's intentional, just like so much of this. It's been very, very intentional. But I always hesitate to sort of stop the conversation there, but just because I'm going to stop where I started. It's not a religious conflict as they want us to believe it is. That's just the way that they sort of push the narrative forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I'm glad to hear you say that you think it's breaking down a bit. That's hopeful. I mean, there's no other way. I wanted to talk about moving away from religion, to talk about race, I guess. My family is Indian Muslim. They lived through South African apartheid and ended up emigrating because of it to the UK, where I was born. You've been to the West Bank. You've worked with the Arab American Institute, with Human Rights Watch. From what you've seen and what you've heard about over all your decades of research, can you just paint for our listeners a picture of what it's like to live under Israeli apartheid, how it operates on the ground, not just in occupied territories, but all across historic Palestine?
Absolutely. I'm going to actually share my story because I don't have to guess. I've experienced it myself. Um, Rarely do I go back and not get detained for hours and hours. It's very common that I get strip searched. I missed my cousin's the party ahead of my cousin's wedding because they held me for so long. Um, every time I cross, because I have family in the West Bank and I have family in the North. Anytime I cross back and forth, it's never without incident. Um, and I have an American passport. And so, I've had, again, like I said, I've been strip searched, I've been humiliated, I've had my things just rifled through and broken and taken, and pictures of my grandparents, and then they'll shuffle you between rooms and ask questions like, when was your great grandfather's birthday? Which I remember telling my parents and my dad being like, I don't remember when my grandfather's birthday was, but this is the intent, and this is what I experience as an American citizen with an American passport from like a country that literally funds the existence of the state of Israel. So imagine what it's like to be Palestinian living under this apartheid, under this oppression and occupation all day, every day. And we're seeing across the West Bank continued demolition, continued settlement expansion. And it just makes me want to scream, because there's this conversation among the political class of potential annexation. It's happening. There's no potential. It's happening right now. Right now it's happening. And we're paying for it. The United States and other countries too are paying to allow this to happen. I don't know if you heard the story of Mohammed Ibrahim, who was just released recently, who after being held for 9 months, an American boy was held for 9 months after his cousin, also an American, was beaten to death by settlers. And that his cousin Saif was the seventh American killed by either settlers or the military in just the last 2 years with zero accountability. None. Still no accountability.
Yeah.
So again, this is what's happening to people with American citizenship. It's that times a million to the Palestinian people every single day. They just, you've seen it's happening in front of everybody's faces. The harassment, they go in just beating people. I don't know if you saw, there was recently a video of a gentleman was praying on the side of the road, and a settler ran into him in a like a four-wheeler.
Yeah, like a tractor.
And then there was a boy was just walking on the side of the road in a car. A settler rammed into him. There's no accountability for this. And this is the West Bank. That's, we keep seeing there's massacring children in Gaza too, with impunity, with no accountability. We're seeing it with our own eyes. We're getting gaslit, of course, and we're being told that the 8-year-old and the 11-year-old that crossed the yellow line, that nobody knows where the yellow line is, were a threat to security. The children were a threat to security. And this is what we're being told. And this is my other favorite thing about Western media is they don't call them children. They'll call them threats. They'll call them, when Hind was killed, I think they called her a young woman or something. It was something insane like that. Hind, a 5-year-old, a 5-year-old child doesn't even get to die as a child. It's absolute madness. And it's every single day, and with the complicity of the United States and countries around the world.
No, you're 100% right. And the guy who rammed, the settler who rammed the guy who was praying was released without charges. So, and it goes on and on, it's
Yeah.
just it's horrific. But you're in the US, and speaking truth about Palestine comes with a price. So it ends careers overnight, especially in your industry or well, our industry. And you've been working with in American politics for a very long time. You were Bernie Sanders' deputy campaign manager, as Shamim mentioned. But even Bernie, the most progressive of politicians, he's always blaming Netanyahu or his extremist government. But for us Palestinians, it's not about which Israeli government is in power. Zionism at its core is the issue, the ideology, the brutality, the racism, the expansionist ethno-settler colonial project. This is what we really want to see dismantled. It's like saying, okay, well, the Nazi Party can continue to exist if Hitler and his henchmen were removed. But we've been through a genocide, a 2-year live stream genocide, and the same principle really needs to apply to the Zionists. But this isn't, and people are always giving excuses in the U.S. political arena, even with the most progressive person. So can you talk about this and what you've personally and professionally been through for refusing to stay silent? And also, how do you see it changing? Because you're in it, right?
Yeah. Like I mentioned, especially in politics, I've lost clients because I'm Palestinian before 2023 and since 2023. And again, people will say to me, people who care about me, and they think they're giving me nice advice. Oh, just don't say that just keep your head, just don't say you're Palestinian. I'm like, nope. I wake up every day and I'm Palestinian. We don't hide that. That doesn't change. And I would never. Like I said, I'm proud to be Palestinian. Uh, and I remember I lost a client. I was visiting my parents, and I literally lost a client because I'm Palestinian. It was very frustrating. It was somebody I had known for a long time, and I even considered a friend. It, and I was very frustrated. And my mom was worried. My mom worries because everybody's moms worry about them, of course. And she's, oh my God, what are you going to do? And this is so bad. And I said, you know what? This is tough, but I don't want to work with those people. When somebody, it's that beautiful Maya Angelou quote, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them. I don't want to be part of any of that. I don't. And is it difficult? Of course it is. I have bills just like anybody else. I have a team that relies on me. I don't want to let anybody down. I mean, life is hard enough, but I couldn't live with myself if all I was doing was sort of pursuing a paycheck, frankly. Um, I don't operate that way, and I never will. I just could. I'm the kind of person who gets sick if I'm around some, literally like ill if I'm around things that I don't believe in. And so I would rather not. So I have, those consequences have happened. And I've worked with people too in the artist community who have lost roles, lost jobs, can't get booked, things like that because of their advocacy. And at the end of the day, I think we all have to be able to look ourselves in the mirror, and all of the excuses that people make. I don't, I just don't, I feel like I don't have time for them anymore. None of us do, especially just like you said, it's a live stream 2-year genocide that is ongoing. Try as they may to say there's a ceasefire. We all know it's ridiculous. There is no actual ceasefire. And that's Gaza. That's the West Bank is like we just talked about. It's a whole issue on its own. And so, what are we doing here if we're just sort of going along? And I will say the artists that I work with and have worked with the most and I'm closest to understand that as well. And so many of them have a deep understanding of the gift that their platform is. It is a gift. And they have very, very um, trusting audiences who wouldn't necessarily hear some of this information otherwise, except for their platforms, because they're fans, because they like their work, because they like, their films or their shows or whatever it is. And so the ones, like I said, that I've worked the longest with and I'm closest to have a deep understanding of the gift that it is, but also the responsibility that it carries. And so is it easy? No, of course not. It's frustrating, it's hard, it's upsetting. People can be so awful, frankly, and disappointing, but at the end of the day, nothing that any of us will experience is even comes close to what the people in Gaza, in the West Bank, and in the North too, are experiencing every single day. And globally as well. I mean, it's not the atrocities in Sudan, the atrocities in the Congo, in Haiti, in Yemen. It's just on and on and on and on. And frankly, also in the United States, the disgusting cesspool that the US has turned into. I mean, not that it hasn't always had its issues, but it's special these days. It really, we have to sort of understand the privilege that we come from, even as a Palestinian person. I'm a Palestinian person in the United States. I was born in the United States. So it's even just, I have a set of privileges that I have to acknowledge as well.
I love that about the responsibility because I think a lot of people think they don't view their platform and their fan base as a responsibility. So beautifully said. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. At the DNC in August 2024, you said, and I quote, "A shift in rhetoric does not save lives. What I'm asking Harris's team to do is very simple: follow our own damn laws." You don't hear much of that kind of talk in politics, which is really refreshing to hear. Can you talk about the power of words and speaking directly, clearly, uncompromisingly, especially in the political system, which is so tied up in knots, and all these word salads come out with respect to Gaza, and genocide and all of these things that nobody wants to admit to for various compromising reasons? Why do words make such a
Yeah.
difference?
I think it it's so it's infuriating, frankly, because words do matter. They absolutely do. And at the end of the day, the genocide needs to end. You know what I mean? And so this component of it that we need to be speaking honestly and clearly and plainly, and the simplicity of just stop killing us should be so central and shouldn't be. How is that controversial? How is it that anybody could potentially possibly not understand the simplicity of that message? I but again, coming back to your question, words do matter. And the pretzel that people tie themselves into, whether they call it a war, which I have to educate people constantly what war and conflict implies, those words specifically. What does it mean you say there's war? What does it mean when you say there's conflict? And just to be very plain, for anybody listening who doesn't know, those words imply parity. They imply that there is an equity on both sides, that both sides are coming at this with equal ability. And that's never been the case. Never. And so this idea that there's a conflict, like these two kids on the playground aren't getting along, or that it's war, like the two sides have equal access, is just nuts. But even those words, even using those words, are intentional. And then what's the extension of that? The extension of that is it's so complicated. It's so complicated. I hear this all the time from politicians and from artists and celebrities that their publicists have told them. And let me just preface this by saying there are some really wonderful publicists out there, and there's some really horrible publicists and managers and all that. So there definitely is a mix. I personally have started creating a list of the great managers, the great publicists, and then the other list too, the people I just will never work with, because that is the cop out answer. In the same way that saying it's a conflict is a cop out, saying it's complicated is a cop out. It's just saying, and I hear this, like I said, all the time. Oh, it's so complicated. I really shouldn't say anything about this. Oh, it's so complicated. Oh, I don't know enough. My favorite thing that I've heard from some of the newer artists, and frankly, members of Congress too, who are in this space more, they're newer to this space, is I'm educating myself. I know I don't know enough, but what I do know is what I'm seeing is wrong. It's that simple.
Yeah.
It is that simple.
Yeah.
And and we talk about children a lot, and of course that's important. There's no one more innocent than children. But also the demonization of men and women among our people is just and again, we see this across other populations too. We see it in Black communities, in Latino communities, in Indigenous communities. I remind people all the time that the original Constitution of the United States called Native Americans savages. I mean, it's the same dehumanization, it's the same demonization, it's the same otherizing that we see across communities. And they do it to us every single day in an attempt to silence us. And that's what it's about. And I call it scaring into submission, scaring into submission, scaring into silence. And it's worked for so many years. It worked until recently.
Mm. And thanks to people like you who are educating from the trenches, if you like, in the
Yeah.
US. And it is complete asymmetry. And I'm glad you explained it to the audience listening. Rania, you also served as a media consultant for the Uncommitted campaign, and I think you sent around 700,000 voters to the primaries to protest Biden's Gaza genocide and policy, in support of the genocide. And at the DNC, the movement demanded a Palestinian speaker on the main stage, but it was refused, despite all the citizens' support for Palestinians and despite it being a live streamed genocide. So the Democratic Party flat out refused to let Palestinian voices be heard. Can you talk about why, and also, are we seeing a change? Is it ever going to happen where actually we see justice and fairness in the US?
We definitely are seeing a change. But I often tell this, it's not a funny joke, but I tell a joke that rarely do politicians wake up deciding to do the right thing. They have to be forced to do the right thing. So, and we've seen this across historic movements in the world, in the United States, but around the world too, where it is it is the shift in public opinion that happens first, that forces the hands of those in power to change. And whether it's from a place of authenticity or a place of, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my seat, that's usually, it's one of those things. I have seen, I will say, I have seen members of Congress truly evolve. I mean, really, really evolve and cut and the same ones who've historically said, "Oh, it's complicated. Oh, I don't know." All of those things who've come across, and they are so um floored by what they're seeing and appalled by their complicity in it. There's several, but I want to just name, like, Chris Van Hollen, who's a senator from Maryland, is a great example. He's a champion of the Palestinian people, truly, truly, truly. He did not start there. Um, Delia Ramirez, too, she's a congresswoman from Illinois. She is the original sponsor of the Block the Bombs Act, which I know we'll talk about in a little bit. She did not start there. Imagine, she didn't start there, and she's carrying the major piece of legislation in Congress right now. And we saw it's really hard to talk about because it's not enough, but we saw in the US Senate earlier this year historic voting numbers on what's called the JRDs, Joint Resolution of Disapproval, which would have stopped arms transfers. It's very complicated and, like, specific arms in specific places, but the majority of the Democratic caucus voted for those. We would, I mean, imagine, like, we've never seen anything like that before. Is it enough? Of course it's not enough. But these are historic moments that we can't say, "Oh, look, we had this historic moment. Now we're done, we're going home." No, we have to build off of these things. But we are seeing the shift. And in part, the shift is because we can't unsee what we're seeing. And in part, the shift is because the numbers are staggering across the United States among Democrats, Republicans, and independents. We've never seen a shift like this on any issue in the United States as we have on Israel and Palestine, where public opinion has just been flipped completely on its head. And we continue to see, and I always say, I work in politics, and people who do what I do oftentimes will take a poll and it's like, "Oh, this is the end all be all. This is what we base everything on." I'm not that person. I think a poll is a snapshot in time. But we have 2.5 years of polling. We don't have 1 month or 6 months or 10 months. We have 2+ years of polling that show a consistent shift among the broader population. Of course, especially young people. Young people across ideologies have completely flipped, but not just young people. So we're seeing this consistently shift, which is why we are also seeing the desperation. I think the Israeli government just signed a $700 million, essentially, Hezbollah budget. I think they added $140 million to the existing budget because they are losing. They
Yeah.
are losing the narrative war. I hate to use that idiom, but they're losing the narrative here, and they are outspending us exponentially. And we all saw, this is what's so incredible, is there's these accusations of artists being paid by Hamas or whomever, and yet we know that the state of Israel is paying influencers $7,000 a post. But so, there's that saying, every accusation is a confession. We're seeing it play out, and they're losing,
Yeah.
and they're desperate. And so they're just throwing more and more and more at us because they're desperate.
Yeah, I would argue also that is not a war because, again, as you say, the resources of the Hasbara and the
Yeah,
PR is
yeah,
way above anything that is coming on the other side. But
absolutely.
still, I think the naked images coming out of Gaza after October 23 were just obvious, especially to young people who are
Yeah,
watching them on TikTok, which is why you have TikTok being bought by Larry Ellison and people who are trying to control that now.
absolutely.
But it is great. It's transformative. We've seen that, as you say, globally, which is really, really encouraging. In our industry, in the film industry, it's very hard to get people to speak up because of the control that is still held by a very strong pro-Zionist lobby, which sees kind of critique of anybody perpetrating a genocide as anti-Semitic, which it clearly isn't. So for me, definitely, and Hanan, I think just seeing the Artists for Ceasefire your movement rise up on social media at that time was like, seeing an oasis in the desert. It was really great and wonderful to see this collective coming together so fast. Can you tell us a little bit about this and your part in this?
Yes, so I think it seems like it came together so fast. Well, and in a lot of ways it did, but I think it's also decades of work from many people kind of coming to a head, if I can say it that way. There are so many people who have been pushing this boulder uphill for so long. And frankly, having to do it in the shadows for a lot of the reasons that you named, the attacks, the threats, all of those things, but still doing this work and educating people and bringing people along and ensuring that they have the information in front of them. And so, unfortunately, I think many of us knew what was going to happen after October 7th. And a lot of these efforts were a desperate attempt to cut it off, to make people aware of it before it happened. I don't think anybody who's done any of this work, whether it's in the political industry or the, in celebrity Hollywood kind of film and television industry, I don't think anybody had a misconception of what was possible and what was not possible, but we had to try. We had to try, we had to bring people together. And I think still we're seeing this happen in film and television where we're trying to bring people together. One, because there's strength in numbers, of course, but two, because they provide cover for each other and a permission structure for each other. And and a sense of safety, if I can even say it that way, of this is atrocious and wrong, and I'm seeing it and you're seeing it. We're going to come out together as a collective because it's the right thing to do. And also because when we do this together, it provides a little bit more strength, a little bit more safety. Now, it's not, nobody's infallible. We're still seeing consequences um, play out for people who are speaking up, but not nearly in the way that we used to. I'm not going to pretend like it's not, it's all sunflowers and rainbows and butterflies. And when you do this, it's not. We know that, but it is different. We are existing in a different time. And frankly, it's very sad because you mentioned the attacks of, the attacks and things like that. There are these attacks of anti-Semitism. They're still using these old tactics. And the sad thing to me is there's real anti-Semitism. There's real hate. And they've diminished it to such a place that it's starting to mean nothing. when there is an actual rise in hate crimes against Jewish people, against Muslim people, against Palestinian people, you know what I like? There is a real rise in hate crimes, but when you diminish something so much, you're only harming the people that you're claiming to be protecting. I mean, the I don't know, the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, is claims to be an entity that exists to fight back against anti-Semitism. That's not what it is. That's not at all. There's actual real anti-Semitism that they have excused time and time again. And so we see things like this, and it's really it's upsetting, frankly. I mean, I am somebody who, I love people. I love all people. I just do. And to see what is happening makes nobody more safe. In fact, it makes everybody less safe. And that's just the truth. And but they're creating this. They've done this themselves. The Zionist entity, the APACs, the DMFIs, the ADLs of the world have, and obviously the state of Israel themselves, they have done this themselves. And it's sort of just a self-fulfilling prophecy of fear mongering in order to, it's not just scaring people into submission so they don't speak out, it's scaring people into submission and believing that there's only one place in the world where Jewish people can be safe, which is absurd. It's absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
actually more anti-Semitic than anything by claiming.
Exactly. Oh my
Right?
God. Every time Joe Biden said it, I was like, how is this not anti-Semitic? Like, how is it not anti-Semitic to say that? But what do I know?
Exactly, 100%. And the world is now finally witnessing the ongoing theft of Palestinians, the ethnic cleansing. We call it the al-Nakba al-Mustamirra, the ongoing Nakba that never really stopped, but now it's out in the open despite years of denial. Um, but also, what you're seeing is artists, activists have all come together to ask the US to stop breaking its own laws and to stop sending arms to Israel and money and so on. So, can you talk about the significant additions to what you're requesting, and also for the audience who might not know what are the Leahy laws, how are they being broken, and also the Arms Export Control Act and how it all links in?
Yeah, so these are just very simply, these are US laws that have been on the books for many, many years that ensure that any state, any country that receives aid, arms transfers from the United States, that they are not violating human rights laws and humanitarian laws. Things like forced displacement, things like torture, things like disappearance, things like genocide. The United States is actually and has been actively breaking its own laws, frankly, for years, not even just the last 2 years, for years, because, like we've been talking about, this apartheid is not new. This occupation is not new. This abuse is not new. These things have been going on for 77, it's almost 78 years now. And so when you read the quote when from the DNC, from the Democratic National Convention last year, yeah, last year. Oh my gosh, the years are all running together. That's what I was referring to. We are breaking our own laws. And frankly, other countries have similar laws on the books too, where you cannot provide support for a country that is breaking human rights laws. And that's what the Leahy Law says. And that is exactly what is happening right now. We are breaking our own laws, and we have been. And so that has come forward more poignantly, I think, in the last year or so. Um, and we saw, I mentioned earlier, the Block the Bombs Act, which Delia Ramirez from Illinois and Sarah Jacobs from California. Sarah Jacobs is a young Jewish member of Congress from California, who the two of them are the original co-sponsors of this bill that literally just says what it sounds like. It stopped the arms transfers to Israel, which again, you know, historic moments are very important. We need more than that, but this is one of those historic moments of the fact that there is a piece of legislation in the United States Congress to stop arms transfers is not a small thing. And we're up to, I believe, 60 co-sponsors now on this piece of legislation in the US House of Representatives. And I have to tell you, this is where I have to say advocacy works. I adore these members that, Rashida Tlaib, of course, is on it. All of our favorites, Ilhan Omar, and like I said, Delia Ramirez, Sarah Jacobs, Jamie Raskin, who's another Jewish member of Congress, who's very, has kind of been on his own journey coming along here. It's all of this is very important, and I don't believe it would have happened without the advocacy leading up to it. So all of these grassroots campaigns, all of these collectives and coalitions and NGOs and nonprofits that have come together to demand these things is, I think, why we are here today. Again, is it enough? Of course not. But it is the thing that we have to continue building off of. And so we're existing in a moment in the United States where we're actually really terrible about not caring about foreign policy until something happens. And then generally speaking, something happens, everybody in the country is very upset about it, and then we turn the page to the next thing. So holding people's attention for this long has been difficult. It continues to be difficult, just like you both mentioned, with this charade that they're pretending is a ceasefire, which has, since day one, has been broken by Israel. And I mean, even just from an aid perspective, they were supposed to scale up to 600 trucks a day. Nowhere even near that. Nowhere near that, including medical aid. I work with a Palestine Children Relief Fund. Their PCRF, they're really incredible organization. They have been trying to stand up a prosthetics program for children in Gaza. They can't get any materials in. So imagine this country has created the largest cohort of child amputees in the history of the world, and we can't get in the supplies necessary to allow some semblance of dignity and life for these kids. And I mean, we've all seen the stories and we've heard them that, the child who wanted to be a soccer player and has lost both of their legs. And I mean, it's staggering and disgusting and inhumane and still happening. And they want us to believe that there's a ceasefire in place that's actually being honored. It's nuts. It's just absolutely nuts. So sorry, that was a long answer to your question, but the long story short is we are actively continuing to break our own laws.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, they've gotten away with it for a long time, as you say, and you were saying that the kinds of things they're saying, there's a ceasefire in place and there isn't. These are all lies that we've kind of gotten used to. So let's talk about that a little bit more. We've touched on them once in a while, but the Artists, the Ceasefire Collective has really faced a lot of attacks. I don't even want to dignify them, but it's been called uninformed, anti-American, and no surprise, anti-Semitism cloaked in anti-Zionism. Can you explain one thing to our viewers, first of all, is that Palestinians are Semitic, and then talk to us about these coordinated smear campaigns, this Hasbara, which is not only pro-Israel PR, but very aggressive about denigrating people who dare to critique Israel for very relevant reasons. What is it going to take to stop this machinery of intimidation, do you think?
I think we're on our way. And I'll just say at the talking about being that we are actually Semites. I wrote a column for USA Today several years ago, and there were two lines that made Zionist heads explode. And one was that my dad is older than the state of Israel, which is just a fact, but they didn't like that. And the second thing was that we are Semites, and they didn't like that either. And the other thing, I just am going to take one quick second to say,
Please.
There are people who they're Jewish people, but are not Semites at all. Not at all. The number of settlers that have moved from Brooklyn or Pennsylvania or wherever who have literally no attachment to the land, but then claim anti-Semitism is wild to me, but also again very. It's part of the. It's intentional, right? It's back to scaring people into submission, because historically it's worked. This is the first time in my life. I mean, it's been almost 26 years of doing this work. This is the first time in my life where people are just don't care, frankly, about the attacks because they are so absurd. Because, I mean, imagine saying children shouldn't be starved to death and children shouldn't be blown to pieces and children shouldn't be massacred, and that's considered anti Semitic. And I also have to remind people, if you remember, calling for a ceasefire was anti Semitic. This kafia is anti Semitic. Saying Palestine or Palestinian is anti Semitic. That watermelon is anti Semitic. Everything is anti Semitic. And again, just like you said, Semite here. Hanan, you too, like Semite
Right,
here,
the original
you
summit.
know? Yeah. And it is absurd, but it also plays to a lack of education. You know what I mean? That's what it kind of all comes down to, is if somebody doesn't feel like they know enough, and that attack is what ruins careers, ends your livelihood, all these, then it's enough. And again, historically has been enough to shut people up, to make people stop. There are a few brave ones who have been with us forever. I mean, for years and years and years, like, the Susan Sarandons of the world, the Mark Ruffalos of the world, Michael Stites of the world, who have been with us for so long. And they, even before 2023, knew the truth and suffered these attacks and still continued to go. So I want to give credit where credit is due, but then we have again the new people who are newer in this space, whether they be politicians or artists, who started out very scared every time these sort of attacks came, but have very quickly seen what it is because of the level of absurdity. Because again, imagine saying that killing children is wrong is anti-Semitic. What human being can't understand that that's ridiculous? You have to really, 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 back to the willful ignorance, you have to really just like put humanity aside to be like, kids are fair game. And I will say too, and I get, people get into their feelings a little bit when I say this. I believe the same thing about children on October 7th. To me, children are off limits. They should be off limits. I don't care who they are, where they come from, etc. Whether they're the child soldiers in the Congo, which is an atrocity in and of itself, or their children in the West Bank or in Gaza or anywhere else in the world, children are off limits. Yet, for some reason, Palestinian children remain to be the exception of people's humanity. And I have friends who, again, are newer in this space, friends in politics who they've had this awakening. They're seeing the truth, all of these things. And I can't tell you how many people have said to me, I don't know how I'm going to be friends with people. I don't know how I'm going to work with people who have justified to my face that the killing of children is okay.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where we're existing now.
Yeah.
It's
And
not going to continue on accident. Oh, sorry.
no, sorry, Rania, to interrupt you. And it's the dehumanization level and the
Yeah.
erasure of Palestinians that these people have the guts to say, oh, it's like it doesn't count because they're Palestinian, whether children
Yeah.
or, as you said earlier, women or men, as if they don't count.
Yeah.
Um,
And that, I mean, I have to remind people, the Israeli military left babies in incubators to die in these. There's so many atrocities, we forget the number. That happened. That happened. Decomposing babies in incubators in a hospital. How in the world can anyone justify that? But we saw people try to justify it. We saw people try to justify it. It's
it's horrible.
unconscionable.
It is unconscionable, and let alone the babies and children they snatched, who we've never heard of
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
And in Hollywood, artists in Hollywood, whether they continue to face enormous pressure to stay silent, as we said, destroy careers, getting blacklisted, and so on. And you talked about the sort of courage of some of the names you mentioned, but Rania, you have guts. You're fearless. Um, and can you talk about how you've helped mobilize well-known artists who have put their careers on the line for Palestine? Because that's not easy to do, and that's it's very brave of them, but it's also very brave of you, and it shows your power to reach that. Can you talk about that?
Well, thank you for saying that. I feel, to be Palestinian is to exist in this. I think I would be failing my ancestors if I didn't use everything that I have to do everything that I can do. And I know a lot of people feel that way. And again, it's been many people over many years who have been working so hard to educate, to bring the truth forward, who've suffered I mean, worse consequences than I've ever suffered. So it's a decades long effort. It's a collective effort. But I also think because I have my hands in so many spaces, I work in climate and climate justice. I work in justice, girls and women, LGBTQ plus issues, healthcare disparity. I have worked with so many of these artists for years on so many of these issues. And one of my dear friends always says I'm like Palestinian product placement because I am in these spaces. And as for example, as we're talking about climate justice, I am in the rooms to say you can't say you care about climate justice and not care about Palestine. You can't say you care about disability rights and not care about Palestine. You can't say that you care about girls and women and not care about Palestine. It's hypocritical. You can't say that you care about indigenous rights and not care about Palestine. And I'm so fortunate that I get to exist in these spaces with so many different amazing strategists and organizers and policy experts who are along on this, on this ride with me. And so I get to be in these spaces and I get to remind people that if you say you care about this, you also have to bring Palestine into the conversation. And we're seeing it happen more now than we have in the past. These collectives and these coalitions that have come together that have representation from all these different spaces, everything I just mentioned and more have come together to mobilize around Palestine with a deep understanding of the hypocrisy that continues to exist in the world because there's all these fights happening on so many fronts for so many reasons and so many, and again it's all the entities we've already discussed fighting back on it, trying to pretend like these things aren't happening, that they're not intersectional. But and I can't, I mean, I do what I can, and yes, it takes time and effort and a lot of educating, a lot of briefings, a lot of, media prep and those kinds of things that happen. But the reality is I can't do what I do without the backup of the people in these other entities who are saying yeah, who are agreeing, who are providing that permission structure as well. And frankly, a lot of other Palestinian people who have also been in the space, again, organizing, educating, bringing people together, to just help people to understand that this is it's all of us together, and it's the crux of collective liberation, which is such a buzzy phrase. Collective liberation can be such a something that people just kind of say. But if you really are about it, then you are about it. And there can't be exceptions. It's not like, oh, yes, liberation except for. But again, and I mentioned this earlier, and I keep saying I'm going to write something on it one day when I have time, I'm going to do it. But really, the cornerstone of collective liberation and and the division that is so deep, it's such a deep attempt in so many communities, is that white supremacy. It's making us believe in a scarcity mentality. So my liberation is at your expense. Or if you're liberated, then I can't be. And it's just not true. It's that scarcity mentality that we've been it's been beaten into us almost because why? Because then we're fighting each other, not really the people that like you said, Shamim, that it's systemic powers that be that have put these structures in place so intentionally to ensure that we are fighting each other. And so it's also a responsibility, I think, my own responsibility as I am in these spaces. I'm invited into Black liberation spaces. I'm invited into Indigenous liberation spaces. And oftentimes, I feel like I'm there to remind myself and all of us that we're not fighting each other. That in fact, collectively, there's literally nothing we can't accomplish. There's more of us. There just are. And so this is part of the effort too, is this ongoing idea that our liberation is not in competition with each other, it's actually in service of one another.
Beautifully said. And I think also you're being very modest because Yashim and I, two of our films, they're about Palestinians in diaspora, LGBTQ. We're a couple, we work together, and it was very hard, let alone the financing, distribution, marketing. So it was an uphill battle. So what you've achieved and done is really humongous and mammoth. So I just want to acknowledge that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Rania, can I ask you, going back, we talked about you working within the Democratic Party framework, asked us for ceasefire, explicitly calling out weapons transfers because they violate US and international law. And we've talked a little bit about how the US government's complicity. Happy for you to talk more about that and its place in your activism. But what are your ideal demands for the US government at this point?
I think this is a process, obviously. First and foremost is to immediately end the weapons transfers and the funding. That includes, big tech and their complicity in surveillance, in targeting, and all of these things. That includes the United States continuing to fund, they're literally funding settler violence. Another thing I have my hands in is gun violence prevention, because in the United States, we love our guns and it's horrible. I mean, it's the number one cause of deaths among children in the United States is gun violence. But the thing that people often lose sight of, and this comes back to intersectionality, we are literally exporting gun violence. The United States is giving the guns to the settlers in the West Bank that are killing Americans and Palestinians and others. And so when I say the ends of arms transfers, yes, of course, the bombs and all of that, but also the guns and the munitions and all of those things, that has to end. It has to stop. None of this happens I mean, again, there's other countries too, but not at the scale that the United States provides resources. So that has to end. The other thing too is the reversal of the continued annexation, the continued settlement expansions that they're happening literally right now. That's all these final demolition orders that are happening in the West Bank are so horrendous. Accountability has to be at the core, of all of this. We can't have a genocide and be asking Israel's permission to end genocide, and then there. I mean, we've seen this for so long, not even just in the last 2 years, well beyond, where they're investigating their own crimes. Make that make sense, and then more from a longer term perspective. Palestinians have to be at the center of any rebuilding, any leadership that's going on here. We keep saying, like, Tony Blair and Donald Trump being like, I have no words. I rarely am I speechless. It renders me speechless. It's so unbelievable. Come on. And then the other thing too, I have to mention, um, oftentimes we hear it from the Israeli government, but we honestly hear it from our own community too, because this is the intent. There's no leadership among the Palestinian people. Well, there's no leadership because they imprison anyone who's a leader. One in particular, Marwan Barghouti, who's been sitting in prison for 23 years. we all, we always call him our Nelson Mandela. He truly is. And he's one of many. And it works. The intent is to disappear somebody like Marwan so that we don't think about him. Yet he's continuously the most popular Palestinian leader among the diaspora and among people in Gaza and in the West Bank, Palestinian people. But he's been sitting in prison, tortured, and God knows what on purpose. They disappear him, and then they go, "Oh, there's no leadership. There's no one to lead. So we better step in, help those Palestinian people." No, Palestinian people have to be at the core and at the center of anything that happens next. Who the leadership is, what rebuilding looks like, etc. And that is unfortunately, there's this whole dog and pony show happening that we've all seen because we all know Donald Trump loves a dog and pony show.
Yeah.
But
Or they kill and assassinate the leaders, or they place the Vichy government sellout PA who are the least popular
exactly,
as their little puppet.
exactly.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, and that's you hit the nail on the head. They are puppets. They're not representing the Palestinian people. They're lining their pockets and doing whatever the Israeli government tells them to do. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Which is, I mean, I think we've seen the way this is kind of playing out in the conversations that are even happening now. The PA sort of wanting to keep things in place because it's to their benefit and nobody else's. I mean, no Palestinian person's benefit, but just it's to their benefit and to the Israeli government's benefit.
Exactly, exactly. Gaza has really mobilized a lot, has changed perceptions, has opened up people's eyes. The Democrats lost, I think, because of based on the polls, as you said, this is a snapshot, but it is a snapshot of what happened at the time in America, and they refused to vote for a genocidal party that supported the genocide. So you said the regardless of the independence, the right, the left, everyone's sort of feeling it and wanting America first versus Israel first. I think the both foreign and domestic policy has been hijacked by the Israel first lobbies. So how is that untenable situation going to change? I know you said it's changing, but you talk about the power of the lobbies and the continued support and so on. What's the seismic shift that's really going to once and for all dismantle all this corruption? Because at the end of the day, America's democracy, yes, but not really, because without the funding and the vote to get people elected to then serve the Zionist machine, how do you see that changing?
This is such an important question. I'm so glad you came back to it because one of the things, and just like I'm a lifelong Democrat, I identified as a Democrat from a very young age because I believed this was the party of justice and humanity and equity. To tell you the truth, the establishment Democratic Party is Republican light. I mean, it's so shameful. Um, but the reality is, you're exactly right. Like Kamala Harris lost because she refused to separate herself from Joe Biden on Palestine, but on a number of other issues too. Economy, so many of, when she went on whatever show it was and said, I wouldn't do anything differently. Honestly, like that was it for her. I can't tell you how many calls and texts I got from people who were just like, nothing differently, you know what I mean? And so there's definitely that piece of it. But then there's the shift that we're seeing among the electorate. Money matters. Of course it does. I'm never going to pretend like, we saw with Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush last cycle, they dumped in Jamal's race, it was $20 million. In Corey's race, I think it was $14 million in a House race, which this is insane. Like that's unprecedented amounts of money.
Yeah.
I will never pretend like that amount of money doesn't matter, but we are existing in a time where there is an awakening among the general population, not people like me who eat and breathe and sleep this, you know what I mean? This is all day, every day, all I think about. I mean, like the average person who just is existing in the world, is not a political person. we are seeing them wake up to this system and this process and how corrupt it is. So we do, and I say this to all of my clients too. We don't have to raise dollar for dollar what they raise, but we have to be able to be competitive. We have to be able to get our message out. We're also in a place where, Democrat or Republican, people are so sick of the establishment and the status quo. They're sick of it. They're sick of the regular, like, pandering messages and the triangulation. It's a Bill Clinton term. Like, we're really not saying anything, but we're using a lot of words to say it. And they what people are looking for is authenticity. And we actually saw this play out even in this last cycle, where a very large number of people voted for AOC and voted for Donald Trump. Now, they are very far apart, obviously, from a policy perspective, but there was something about just saying it like it is that people are gravitating toward. And I mean, I'd never want to compare anybody to Donald Trump, but there's a reality here. Like, as we all know that he lies 5,000 times before breakfast, but he was showing up in places that frankly Kamala Harris refused to show up to. And he was talking to people in ways, again, they were lies, but he was speaking to people's pain. And I think, are existing in a time, I mean, we'll see what's going to happen, but I think we're existing in a time where people really want true authenticity. And the problem is the establishment is saying, I've literally been in rooms where I've heard this and I've lost my mind and yelled a little bit, maybe a lot, but where people have said, and it's kind of the older establishment class of the party, have said, how do we make our candidates seem more authentic? And I'm like, how about we recruit authentic candidates? But we are seeing this. We are seeing people running for office at a number of levels, local level to federal level, who are not lifelong politicians, who are not, they've been sort of climbing the rungs of the political class in the way that everybody always does. We're seeing people step into these spaces because of the shift in the electorate. And so it's very hard to feel hopeful or anything these days, but I do think we're seeing something. And it's incumbent on all of us to keep this going, because like I said earlier, none of this is going to happen by accident. We're not going to be able to hold on to this by accident. Frankly, what's happening in the United States is atrocious. People are still suffering. People are still having to work 3 or 4 jobs just to make ends meet. People are still filing bankruptcy if they get sick, losing their jobs if their child like breaks their arm. I mean, it's just all of these different things are happening. And then there's what's happening with ICE and deportations. And so there's a lot going on in an attempt, I think, to distract us. But again, all of it is very connected. And so keeping our focus, making sure people are being talked to, not just 6 months before an election, which is what historically happens in this country, but consistently. How do all of these things impact your everyday life? That's kind of what we're seeing happening right now, and what I hope will continue. Obviously, there's an election. 2026 is an election year, and it's our midterms in the United States. We'll see what's going to happen, but I do think that there is an opportunity here to turn the status quo on its head as well.
I agree with you. And Rania, that makes you realize that it is worth it. You've described yourself as a voice for the silence, and over 25 years, I think, dedicated yourself to this struggle for liberation for Palestine and for various other causes. Despite everything, despite the roadblocks, despite being smeared, despite, days when you must not want to get out of bed, what keeps you going? What is it that drives you ultimately, do you think?
It's just the reality, and again, the privilege that I have to work with the people that I work with. I was just in Doha with Sam Hamada, who was Hind Rajab's mother, and she is beyond words, fierce, and I hate to even have to describe her as so strong because it's not fair, but she is. And I can't spend, I was with her for a few days and I can't spend time with somebody like Wissam, um, or Motaz, frankly, either, or any number of people that I have the privilege of getting to work with and say I'm tired or say I'm exhausted and I've had enough or whatever it is. I just can't do that. Um, and I know a lot, and there's a lot of people who feel the same way who are working so hard. And it really is just an understanding that we can't let up. And I know it's not always a healthy lifestyle. Um, but we're in a very important moment. And like I keep saying, we won't continue in this moment on accident. It has to be very strategic and intentional and ongoing. And I have a very kind of crazy set of skills that I've just developed over many years that lend themselves to, I think, to this moment. Um, and it is a privilege. It is a privilege to be able to do this work. It is a privilege to be able to even just sit in spaces with people like Wissam. And I just feel like I would be failing my people and humanity if I stopped. But one day we'll all rest. One day when there's liberation, we'll all rest a little bit.
Inshallah. And it is a privilege to
Mhm.
be a Palestinian and to advocate for Palestine. So that brings me, Rania, to solutions. Let's talk about solutions, because from my perspective and my opinion, I believe in one democratic, decolonized state from the river to the sea. I know that's very controversial for many, with justice, freedom, full equality, human dignity for all, and of course, reparations, complete land and resource restitution for all Palestinians, and the right of return of all Palestinians, which is guaranteed under international law. So I'd love to know what's your vision for Palestine, for justice, for freedom, for equality from your perspective.
Right. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that's it. It is justice and equity for all people. And that doesn't, there is no peace, there is no justice, there is no equity without accountability, which is everything that you just named too. That includes reparations, that includes accountability for the genocide, that includes accountability for nearly 78 years of occupation and apartheid. That includes right of return. I mean, all of these things. And again, Palestinian people being at the heart of what is to come. And I don't mean the PA, just so we're very clear. I know we all agree here, um, but really that it has to, all of these things have to work together. They do. We can't say, oh, okay, that those 2 years happened. Moving on now. That's failure to me. And this is one of the things too, although so many of the NGOs that I'm working with, we've been talking a lot about um, what is happening now. So, for example, like medical evacuations are being granted by the Israeli government very quickly now. Why is that? It's ethnic cleansing. It's ethnic cleansing with permission. They're just going to go, oh, see, they want to leave. And then
Yeah.
they're not going to let anybody return. And
Mm.
these are people who've already been multiple times displaced. And I don't just mean in the last 2 years. And so if the right of return is not at the heart of all of this, we failed. And I just, while I was in Doha, I had the privilege of sitting with a journalist who had just evacuated literally 2 days prior. And his mom was killed, his siblings were killed, home demolished. He'd been displaced, he and his dad had been displaced 8 different times. And and he's one of millions, literally millions, that have this exact same story. If we don't do right by them, then we failed. So, yes, in the end, it is an equal state for all people with equal rights of movement, equal rights in judicial processes, in government representation, and all of these things. But before any of that, we have to have accountability. We have to have reparations. You said it, and I couldn't have said it more perfectly.
Thank you. I'm glad you agree, because they're still peddling the two-state delusion, as I call it, telling us, okay, here's 22, crummy little 22%, and that's getting more and more of a Bantustan. It's
But
just unacceptable to any
it's
Palestinian, I think.
also crazy because the Knesset voted against the two-state solution. So what are we even talking about? This is what I keep saying to people. And I work very closely with the Reverend Jackson and the family. And when Reverend Jesse Jackson called for a two-state solution many years ago, that got him this was a long time ago. That got him death threats. That was a very long time. We're not living in that time anymore. And again, the Knesset voted no. So what are we talking about? That's my thing, is like, this is a cop-out now. These days, talking about a two-state solution is what you say when you don't have anything else to say. So خلاص.
Halas, enough.
Yeah. Indeed. Rania, I've had lots of coffees and dinners and lunches with people in young people in our industry, outside our industry. It almost doesn't matter, who want to speak up, who see the injustice, but they're scared. These could be students who worry about getting tossed out of their colleges or not getting their visas renewed, professionals working in, I don't know, Hollywood or places that they worry about getting the next job, and that they've seen reprisals. What is your advice to people who want to speak up but are not sure how to find their voice?
There's a lot of things people can do behind the scenes. There's, of course, always donating and things like that, but of course, also understand that donating is not an option for everybody. But so many organizations are always looking for volunteers as well. The Red Crescent, PCRF, organizations like Oxfam, and so many others, Human Rights Watch as well. There's just so much need for everything from research to actually like just extra sets of hands and admin work and all kinds of things. And even something like administrative work, it might seem like, oh, what am I doing? But it has to get done. There are all these things. There's nothing too small. I'm very much a believer in people doing what they're able to do. For people with like the artist class that have large platforms and their fear is around not getting booked on the next movie or show, I have a little bit less sympathy. I do think that there are moments in time where we are better served to call in versus call out. I think that moment has passed. We're more than 2 years into a live stream genocide. We are seeing, as much as the media is ignoring it, we still can see what's happening in the West Bank also. It's just like what we talked about earlier. I just believe so deeply that having those platforms is such a point of privilege. I'm going to say something that sometimes gets me into trouble for probably the opposite reasons that you're expecting. But when we're talking about physical safety, I feel very differently, especially with young people in a place like the United States, where literally your physical safety is now in the balance. I'm not going to say get out in the streets anyway, because that is not smart to me. Like I don't want to put a young person's physical safety. That being said, there's still things you can do. You can still organize behind the scenes. One of my really good friends who I work with in the climate justice space always says, everyone's good at something. Everyone's good at something, do that.
I think that's just a wonderful way to end. Thank you. As Ghassan Kanafani wrote, everything in this world can be robbed and stolen, except for one thing. This one thing is the love that emanates from a human being towards a solid commitment to a conviction or cause. History will judge each of us by how we're responding now to the actions that we are taking and not taking to stop the erasure and starvation of Palestinians using food as a weapon and this intentional ongoing genocide. It is our collective responsibility to speak out and act against injustice. So if you have enjoyed today's episode, one way you can help is just to take a moment to like it, to subscribe, and to share it with somebody. That engagement really helps us to amplify voices grounded in humanism and truth and justice. Rania, thank you again for your moral courage, your tireless advocacy, and your unwavering solidarity with Palestine.
And Rania, just to also add a big thank you for being a trailblazer, for showing that a Palestinian woman can rise to the top of American politics and not compromise on who she is and where she comes from. So that means a lot, and shukran. And as I wrap, stories and representation matter. Stay informed, stay engaged, speak up, and most importantly, take action for justice for Palestine. Our collective voice is making a change. In solidarity and with appreciation, see you next time. Shukran.
Thank you so much for having me.